The first clue that my world was about to be turned upside down came from an unexpected phone call. It was Mrs. Martinez, my elderly neighbor, and her voice shook with urgency. There was a crack in her tone, just enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Michael," she whispered like she was sharing some forbidden secret. "You need to get over here right away. Your wife... Something's happening at your house. 2 men went in there a little while ago, and this isn't the first time. You need to catch them in the act." Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. My heart started pounding so hard it felt like it might bust out of my chest. Rebecca, my wife, had been distant for months now, but I chalked it up to life stress, crazy schedules, and the ups and downs that come with being married a long time. But what Mrs. Martinez said cut through all those excuses like a knife. Doubt slammed into me so fast, it hurt to breathe, and sped out of my driveway, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The idea that someone might be disrespecting my home, our home, made my blood boil. As I turned onto my street, the neighborhood seemed eerily quiet, like the calm before a storm. I spotted Mrs. Martinez peeking out from behind her curtain, her face barely visible through the glass. The second she saw me pull up, she darted to her door, yanking it open and practically pulling me inside. Before I could even say a word, "Listen to me," she said. Her voice hushed as her eyes flicked nervously toward my house. "Your wife's home right now," and I saw 2 men go inside. They parked a block away, but I've been keeping an eye on them. It felt like I was living in someone else's nightmare. My stomach churned, and my thoughts raced as the weight of her words settled over me. 2 men, I repeated, as if hearing it again might somehow make it less real. Solemnly, her face tight with concern. "This isn't the first time, Michael. I've seen cars like that here before, always when you're at work. You need to put a stop to this." I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth started to ache. My first instinct was to barge into my house, kick down the door, and demand answers, but a voice in the back of my mind told me that rushing in without a plan might make things worse. Forcing myself to stay calm, I said, "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Martinez. I don't know if I'll be able to keep my cool if I go in there alone, so I'm going to call someone for backup." I dialed Jake, an old friend of mine who used to work as a cop. He picked up on the first ring. "Jake, I need you to get to my place now," I said, keeping my voice low. "Rebecca's home, and there are some guys with her. Bring your sidearm." "I'm not kidding." Jake didn't waste time with questions. "I'm on my way," he said, and hung up. While I waited, I said, and hung up, moved my truck to block the driveway. There was no way I was letting anyone leave until I got some answers. The thought of those men walking out of my house like they owned the place made my blood run hot. I opened the glove box, pulled out my Monster Moss firearm, checked the magazine, and tucked it into my waistband. By the time Jake arrived, adrenaline had taken over. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the moment. Jake and I approached the house in silence, our footsteps crunching lightly on the gravel. I gestured for him to head to the side door while I went for the front. My hand hovered over the doorknob, frozen for just a second, long enough to catch the sound of voices coming from inside. My pulse was pounding so loudly, it felt like it was echoing in my ears. Taking a deep breath, I twisted the knob and stepped into the house with my gun drawn. The air inside felt heavy, like it was thick with tension. I moved, it was thick with tension. Carefully, my steps muffled by the plush carpet underfoot. From somewhere deeper in the house, I could hear Rebecca's laughter, light and carefree, echoing through the space. A man's deeper laugh followed, and the sound twisted something inside me. It was a laugh I hadn't heard from her in months, at least not directed at me. I glanced back at Jake, who gave me a nod. Together, we moved closer to the source of the voices. The closer we got to the dining room, the louder the voices became. Rebecca's laughter rang out again, carefree and happy as if she didn't have a worry in the world. My stomach churned and a bitter taste rose in my throat. When we reached the room, I paused just long enough to take it all in. She was sitting at the head of the table, a glass of red wine in her hand. She twirled the stem between her fingers like she didn't have a damn thing to hide. Across from her sat 2 men, both leaning back in their chairs with an air of smug confidence that made my fists itch to clench. The table was cluttered with half-eaten plates of food, and the scent of roasted chicken and garlic hung in the air. "Rebecca," I said, my voice sharp and cutting. The room fell silent in an instant. Rebecca's head snapped toward me, her eyes going wide for a split second before she quickly masked her expression. She shifted to an annoyed look, as if I were the one interrupting something I had no business seeing. "What are you doing here, Michael?" she asked, her tone cold and dismissive. "What am I doing here?" I repeated, my voice rising as anger bubbled up inside me. My eyes darted to the two men who were watching me with lazy, condescending smirks. Their lack of concern only added fuel to the fire roaring inside me. "That's a hell of a question. This is my house," I said, my voice low but sharp like a blade cutting through the air. Rebecca sighed dramatically, placing her wine glass on the table with a deliberate clink. "Michael, please don't start. They're just friends," I snapped, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. "You mean the kind of friends you sneak into the house when I'm not around?" Her calm facade cracked, and her lips curled into a sneer. "Oh, so now you're playing detective? Let me guess, Mrs. Martinez called you. That nosy old bat should really learn to stay out of other people's business. Don't even think about blaming her," I said, my voice rising with each word. "This isn't about her. This is about you and the lies you've been feeding me for months." Before she could respond, one of the men, tall, broad, and full of himself, stood up and dusted crumbs off his shirt like he owned the place. "Look," he said, holding up his hands as if he were the reasonable one here. "Nobody wants this to turn into a scene. Why don't you just calm down?" His condescending tone sent a jolt of fury through me. "Calm down," I growled, stepping toward him. "You're in my house, sitting at my table, eating my food with my wife, and you've got the nerve to tell me to calm down." The second man, shorter but just as cocky, snickered under his breath. That smug little laugh was gasoline on an already raging fire. Jake, sensing I was about to lose it, stepped in. His voice was calm but carried the weight of authority. "I think it's time for you two to leave," he said, his hand casually resting on his holstered weapon. "Now." The taller guy hesitated, glancing at Rebecca like a dog waiting for its master's command. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her expression a mix of irritation and defiance. "Fine," she said finally, waving them off like they were an inconvenience. "Go on. I'll handle this myself." The two men exchanged a look before shuffling toward the door, muttering under their breath like kids caught breaking curfew. I stepped aside, fists clenched, my jaw so tight it felt like it might shatter. The door closed behind them, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Rebecca stood slowly, the wine glass still in her hand. She took a slow, deliberate sip, her eyes never leaving mine. "Well, congratulations, Michael," she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You've officially humiliated me in front of my friends." "Nice work." "Humiliated you," I said, my voice thick with disbelief. "Do you even hear yourself right now? You've been sneaking around behind my back, and you think you're the victim here." She rolled her eyes, setting the glass down with a loud clink that echoed in the quiet room. "Oh, give me a break. Not everything is about you, Michael. Might be if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't need to find excitement elsewhere." Her words hit me like a slap, stealing the breath from my lungs. This wasn't the Rebecca I knew, the woman I'd fallen in love with. That Rebecca had been kind, supportive, someone I thought I could count on. The person standing in front of me now was cold and unrecognizable. "You're unbelievable," I said, my voice cracking under the weight of my emotions. "Do you even care about me? About this marriage?" "Spare me the drama," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "Let's not pretend this marriage was some fairy tale. We both know it's been over for a long time." Her words cut deep, sharper than any knife ever could. Everything we built, every memory, every promise, shattered in an instant. I felt like the world's biggest fool for not seeing it sooner. "I loved you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I gave you everything, my bead you shouldn't have." She shot back, her lips curling into a cruel smirk. "That's on you." I turned away, my vision blurring as tears threatened to spill. Jake placed a firm hand on my shoulder, grounding me just enough to keep me from doing something reckless. "Michael," he said, quietly, "let it go. She's not worth it." He was right. She wasn't worth it. Not anymore. My hands were trembling, my nails biting into my palms as I tried to steady myself. I glanced back at Rebecca. She was lounging on the couch now, her legs crossed, swirling her wine as if she'd already won some unspoken game. Not worth it, I said softly, my voice hollow. You're right, Jake. She's not worth it. Rebecca smirked again. That same damn smirk that made my blood boil. She thought she'd broken me, that she'd won. My breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought I might explode. Yell, cry, lash out. But instead, a strange calm settled over me. Give me a minute, I told Jake quietly, unsure if leaving me alone with her was a good idea. I gave him a look that said I was in control, at least for now. Reluctantly, he nodded and stepped outside, closing the door behind him. Rebecca didn't even flinch. She looked at me like I was a pawn in some game she was expertly playing. Go ahead, Michael, she said, her tone thick with sarcasm. Let's hear it. The big speech about how I'm the worst wife ever and how I've ruined everything. Get it out of your system. Arrogance was suffocating. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why, Rebecca? Was it about money, attention, or did you just get bored? She laughed, a bitter, dismissive sound. Oh, please. Don't act like a saint. You think you're the perfect husband. You're not. You're predictable, Michael. Day after day, it's the same thing. Work, dinner, TV, bed. Year after year, living with you is like living with a robot. That's your excuse? I said, my voice breaking under the weight of her words. I've done everything I could to give us a good life, I said, my voice trembling with frustration. A stable home, a solid future. I thought that's what we both wanted. Rebecca leaned back, her face devoid of emotion. Well, you thought wrong, she said, her words as sharp as broken glass. I need more than just stability, Michael. I need excitement, passion, something you clearly can't provide. Like a sucker punch, I swallowed hard, refusing to let her see how deeply she'd cut me. So that's it? What now, Rebecca? Are you planning to ride off into the sunset with one of those guys? Or maybe both? Is that what excites you these days? Her eyes narrowed, and for a brief moment the smug mask slipped. Don't you dare sit there and judge me, she hissed. You have no idea what it feels like to be stuck in a marriage that's been dead for years. Stuck? I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh that sounded foreign even to me. You had every opportunity to talk to me, to tell me how you felt. We could have worked on it together, but instead, you chose to sneak around behind my back like a coward. Coward! She shot back, standing up so quickly, the chair scraped against the floor. You're calling me a coward? You're the one who hides behind your job, your routines, and your ridiculous sense of morality. You're too scared to face the fact that maybe, just maybe, we were never supposed to be together. Her venomous words stunned me into silence. I had known things were strained between us, but this deep well of resentment, I hadn't seen it coming. If that's how you felt for so long, then why stay? I asked, my voice quieter now, almost pleading. Why not leave and go chase this passion you're always talking about? Rebecca shrugged, her tone as casual as if we were discussing the weather, because starting over is messy. I like the security, the stability, the perks of being married to you. That doesn't mean I was happy, though. Her bluntness was like a slap in the face. Everything I thought we'd built together, every moment we'd shared, suddenly felt like a lie. You used me, I said, my voice shaking. You took everything I gave you, everything I worked for, and tossed it aside like it was worthless. Oh, stop being so dramatic, she said, rolling her eyes. People grow apart, Michael. It's not some grand tragedy. It's just life. It's not life, I snapped, my voice rising. It's betrayal. She ignored me completely, picking up her phone and scrolling through it like I wasn't even there. Are we done here? Because I have plans tonight. Plans? I said, barely able to keep the disbelief out of my voice. You're unbelievable. After everything, you still think this is just another day for you. Rebecca finally looked up, her expression cold and detached. What do you want from me, Michael? An apology? Regret? Because you're not getting it. If you'd been paying attention, maybe we wouldn't be here. Her coldness was suffocating, the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. You're disgusting, I spat. I don't even know who you are anymore. Good, she said with a cruel smirk. Maybe, now you'll finally stop clinging to this fantasy of who you think I am. For a moment, I just stared at her. This wasn't the woman I fell in love with. The memories of our laughter, our row, promises, all of it felt like a distant, bitter dream. Without another word, I turned and headed for the door. Jake was waiting outside, leaning against his car, his expression unreadable. "Well?" he asked. "It's done," I said, my voice hollow. "You sure?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, I'm sure." As we drove away, I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me in that house, just broken trust and shattered dreams. The farther we got, the heavier the silence grew. Jake didn't press me for details. He just drove, letting the silence speak for itself. But my thoughts weren't silent. They were a chaotic storm of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Rebecca's voice echoed in my head, cutting and dismissive. "Maybe now, you'll finally stop holding on. Let go of what? The idea that I mattered. That she had ever cared." My grip on the wheel tightened as her smirk replayed in my mind over and over again. It was as if she had relished destroying everything we built. "You good?" Jake finally asked, his tone cautious. I let the question hang in the air, unsure how to answer. "I don't know," I said eventually, my voice barely above a whisper. "What do you even do when the person you trusted most is the one who tears your world apart?" Jake sighed and leaned back in his seat. "You breathe," he said. "Simply, you don't fix it tonight. Hell, you don't fix it at all, not with someone like her. People like Rebecca don't change. They don't even see what they've done is wrong." I nodded, though my focus was on the road ahead. Deep down, I knew he was right. Rebecca had made it clear she didn't care about anything except herself. We pulled into Jake's driveway, a modest ranch-style home just outside town. He handed me a beer as we stepped inside, and I sank onto his couch. The weight of everything still pressed down on me. But the familiarity of his presence offered a sliver of comfort. "So what now?" Jake asked, watching me closely. "I don't know," I admitted, staring down at the bottle in my hands. "I can't go back there, not tonight." "You can stay here as long as you need," he said. "But you need to figure out what's next." "Are you need to figure out what's next? Going to fight for that marriage, or is this?" His question lingered in the air. "Fight for the marriage." I couldn't imagine there was anything left worth fighting for. There was nothing left to salvage. Rebecca had made her stance painfully clear, mocking me, belittling me, and reducing everything we built to a joke. The idea of trying to repair things after that felt like swallowing broken glass. "She doesn't want to fix this," I said at last, my voice hollow. "I don't think she ever did." Jake leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "Then don't waste your energy, Michael. She's already gone. Don't fight for someone who's not in the ring with you." The next morning, I woke on Jake's couch, the stale ache in my head only matched by the crushing weight in my chest. It wasn't the beer that lingered. It was the beer that lingered. It was the aftershock of Rebecca's betrayal. I stared blankly at my phone, swiping through apps without seeing anything, until a notification from an unknown number broke through my haze. I opened it, and my stomach turned. It was a photo of Rebecca, sitting with one of the men from last night at a bar. She was laughing, drinking, her face glowing with ease and happiness. The timestamp told me all I needed to know. It had been taken just an hour after I left the house. I couldn't breathe. It didn't matter who had sent it, whether it was someone trying to stir the pot or rub salt in the wound. What mattered was the undeniable proof staring back at me. Rebecca wasn't even pretending anymore. She'd moved on without guilt or hesitation, leaving me to pick up the wreckage of the life we built together. "You good?" Jake's voice cut through the silence. He stood in the doorway, his face laced with concern. I held up my phone wordlessly. He crossed the room, taking one look at the screen before letting out a low whistle. "Damn," he said. She's not even trying to hide it, is she?" "No," I said quietly, my voice tight and restrained. "She doesn't care. She'd never care." Jake let out a heavy sigh. "What's your next move?" I stood, my hands shaking as I paced the room. Anger boiled inside me, so raw and overpowering that it threatened to explode. I wanted to do something, anything, to make her feel what I was feeling. But what would that change? Rebecca wasn't capable of regret, or even shame. "I'm done," I said finally, my voice stronger this time. "I'm filing for divorce." Jake nodded, his expression grim but supportive. "Good, it's about time. You deserve better." Cousin Sophia arrived at Jake's place that afternoon, having driven 3 hours after hearing what happened. She had always been the practical one in the family, a no-nonsense accountant with a gift for cutting through emotional chaos. "I can't believe she did this to you," Sophia said. her dark eyes flashing with anger as she hugged me. "But I'm here now, and we're going to make sure she doesn't take anything else from you." The rest of the day blurred together, a series of calls to lawyers, banks, and anyone who could help me start pulling my life away from hers. For the first time in days, I felt a sliver of control returning. But just as I began to steady myself, my phone buzzed again. "Michael, Mrs. Martinez," familiar voice trembled on the other end. "You need to come home right now." My chest tightened. "What's going on?" "I've been watching the house," she said hurriedly. "Rebecca's there, but she's not alone. There's someone else with her, and they're fighting. Loudly. Fighting," I repeated, already reaching for my keys. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking. "It doesn't sound good. Michael, you need to hurry." I ended the call without another word, bolting out the door. Jake was right behind me, his hand instinctively brushing the holster on his belt. Sophia insisted on coming too, saying firmly, "You need a witness who isn't emotionally involved." The drive to the house was tense and quiet, my mind racing with possibilities. Who was this new man? What were they fighting about? And what the hell was I about to walk into? When we arrived, Mrs. Martinez was standing in her driveway, pale and visibly shaken. She pointed toward my house with a trembling hand. "They're in there," she whispered. This time, I didn't stop to think. I stormed up to the front door and shoved it open, before sending it slamming into the wall. Shouting filled the air, Rebecca's voice, high-pitched and frantic, mingled with a man's low, furious growl. The living room was untouched, but the chaos was clearly coming from upstairs. Jake followed me, his voice steady but firm. "Michael, take it easy. We don't know what we're dealing with." But I was already halfway up the stairs, adrenaline coursing through me like fire. My footsteps pounded against tile, the wood echoing like warning shots as I reached the top landing. "You're crazy." Rebecca's voice cut through the air, trembling with panic. "Get out of here before I call the cops." "Call them," a man roared back. "Let's see what they think about all the lies you've been telling." The door to the bedroom was slightly ajar, and through the gap, I could see Rebecca near the window, her arms crossed tightly. She looked defensive but more irritated than scared. The man, tall and wiry, with wild eyes, paced like a predator, hissed like a predator, body tense with fury. As soon as I stepped into the room, his gaze snapped to me. "And who the hell are you?" he barked, pointing a finger as though I were the one intruding. I ignored him, my eyes locked on Rebecca. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice low and sharp. "Another one of your friends." She rolled her eyes, her hands moving to her hips in exasperation. "Oh, don't start, Michael. This has nothing to do with you, nothing to do with me," I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. "You've turned our home into a circus, and now there's some lunatic screaming in our bedroom. How the hell does this not involve me?" The man stepped forward, his jaw tight, and his tone dripping with disdain. "You must be the husband," he sneered. "The clueless idiot. She's been stringing along all this time." "Careful," Jake said from the doorway, his voice calm but deadly. "Serious." His hand hovered near his holster, his sharp eyes fixed on the man like a hawk watching its prey. Sophia stood behind Jake, her eyes taking in every detail of the scene, her expression a mix of disgust and calculation. The air in the room grew heavy, the tension thick enough to cut. I could feel the situation teetering dangerously close to the edge, and for the first time, I wasn't sure who was more volatile. Rebecca threw up her hands. Exasperated. "Oh, for God's sake, calm down, everyone. This is Victor. He's nobody, okay? Just some guy who's overreacting." Victor's laugh was sharp, cold, and humorless. "Nobody? Sure, Rebecca. Why don't you go ahead and tell your husband the truth? Or should I?" My stomach dropped, the knot in my chest tightening with every passing second. "What's he talking about, Rebecca?" I asked, my voice low and tense. Rebecca glared at him, her eyes narrowing into sharp, venomous slits. "Shut up, Victor. You don't know what you're talking about?" "Oh, I don't," Victor snapped back, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He turned to me, his expression hard and unflinching. "She's been lying to both of us, man, playing you for the house, the money, and the stability, while she comes to me for everything else." Victor Shut your mouth. Rebecca screamed, lunging toward him. Jake moved in fast, his arm shooting out to block her. Not a step closer, he warned, his voice like steel. I'm not playing games here. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Turned to Rebecca, my hands trembling. Is that true? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Have you been with him too? Rebecca froze just for a moment, long enough to confirm what I already knew in my gut. Then she crossed her arm. Her chin jutted out in defiance, words sharp and cutting. So what if I have? She snapped. You're not exactly a prize, Michael. God, you're so pathetic. Always whining about your feelings like that makes you special or something. Her words hit me like a freight train, the room spinning as my mind raced to keep up. The woman standing in front of me was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize, someone filled with cruelty and disdain. I gave you everything, Rebecca, I said, my voice cracking. Everything. And this is what you do. This is how you repay me. Oh, spare me the theatrics, she said, throwing up her hands. You're boring, Michael, predictable. I needed more and you couldn't give it to me. Victor smirked, cutting in. And I bet you didn't tell him about the money, did you? Rebecca's face paled for the briefest moment before her glare hardened. Shut up. Victor, what money? I asked, my voice rising. What the hell is he talking about? Victor stepped closer, his lip curling in disgust. She's been draining your joint account, man. Thousands of dollars, she says. It's for bills, but it's all going into her escape fund. She's been planning to ditch you for months. Rebecca's voice cracked as she screamed, You're lying. But it didn't matter. The pieces had already started to fall into place. Her sudden obsession with managing the finances, the mysterious withdrawals I'd noticed but never questioned. The growing distance between us, it all fit now, and it felt, now, like the ground beneath me had disappeared. I turned to her, my voice shaking. How could you do this to me? Rebecca didn't answer. She just stared at me with cold indifference, as if daring me to react. Victor let out a bitter chuckle and turned toward the door. I'm done with this circus, he muttered before walking out. His footsteps echoing down the stairs. Rebecca remained where she was, silent and unbothered, as if she were the one in control. Sophia stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. I think we should check those accounts right now. Michael, we need to see exactly what she's been doing. Jake's voice broke through the haze. Michael, let's go. This isn't worth it. I nodded numbly, my body moving on autopilot as I followed Jake and Sophia out of the house without looking back. The drive to Jake's place was silent, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on me like a boulder. My mind replayed Rebecca's words, her actions, her complete lack of remorse. And Victor, his smug revelations had exposed the depths of her betrayal, revealing a woman I no longer knew. Jake finally spoke, his voice steady but firm. Michael, I'm going to be real with you. She's not just messing up your marriage. She's wrecking your finances. You need to act now. I know, I said quietly, my voice barely audible. I'll call my lawyer in the morning. You can't wait until morning, Jake pressed. You need to freeze your accounts tonight. Every minute you delay is another minute she can siphon off more. He's right, Sophia added, her accountant's instincts kicking in. If what Victor said is true, she could drain everything before you wake up tomorrow. Nodding, I pulled out my phone with trembling hands and logged into the banking app. Mind into, heart sank as I scrolled through the recent transactions. Victor wasn't lying. Thousands of dollars had been withdrawn in just the past few months. Some amounts were small, others staggering. The most recent transaction had been only hours ago. She's drained almost 10 grand. I muttered, my voice shaking. That was supposed to go toward the mortgage. Jake's jaw tightened, his anger barely restrained. That's not just betrayal. That's theft. Shut her down, Michael, Sophia said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Now, right there in Jake's driveway, I made the calls, I canceled the shared credit cards, froze the joint accounts, and moved what little money remained into a separate account under my name. Each call felt like another piece of my marriage crumbling to dust. By the time we went inside, it was late. Jake handed me a beer and sat across from me at the kitchen table, his expression grim but steady. You did the right thing, he said firmly. This is going to hurt like hell, but you've got to rip the band-aid off. I nodded, staring at the table. I didn't get it. How did I not see this coming? How did I miss who she really was? Jake leaned back, folding his arms. Because you're a good guy, Michael. You believe in people. You trust them. And sometimes people take advantage of that. And sometimes, Sophia added, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. The people closest to us are the best at hiding who they really are. This isn't your fault. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the beer in my hand, trying to figure out how to rebuild my life from the ashes Rebecca had left behind. You believed in her, and she used that against you, Jake said, his voice calm but firm. The morning sun had barely started to rise when my phone buzzed on the table. Bleary-eyed, I picked it up to see a message from an unknown number. My stomach churned as I opened it. You think you're clever, cutting off the money. You're pathetic. I'll get what I'm owed one way or another. I stared at the words, my hands shaking. After all the lies, after everything she'd done, Rebecca still managed to paint herself as the victim. The sheer audacity of it was almost enough to make me laugh. If it didn't hurt so damn much. Rebecca, Jake asked from across the room. Yeah, I said, handing him the phone. He read the message, his expression darkening. She's bluffing, he said flatly. You've already locked her out of the accounts. She's got no leverage left. My bay, not money, I muttered, the knot in my stomach tightening. But there's plenty more she could go after. My mind raced, our house, the car, even my reputation. Rebecca had made it crystal clear she'd scorch the earth if it meant coming out on top. Then you need to stay ahead of her, Sophia said, her practical nature taking over. Document everything. Every text, every call, every interaction. We need to build a case that shows exactly what she's been doing. Jake's tone hardened. She's right. Call your lawyer. Document everything she says or does. And don't leave anything to chance. The rest of the day was a blur of frantic phone calls and endless paperwork. I met with my lawyer, filed motions and endless paperwork. Started building a defense against whatever Rebecca had planned next. By the time I got home, I was running on fumes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That feeling was confirmed when my phone buzzed again. It was Mrs. Martinez. Michael, she said, her voice trembling. You need to come home right now. What's wrong? I asked, already grabbing my keys. It's Rebecca, she said quickly. She's been having people over all day. Men. Trucks? I think she's selling off your things, Michael. I froze. Selling things? What kind of things? Furniture, electronics, anything she can carry out of the house. There's a moving truck in the driveway right now. Thanks for telling me, Mrs. Martinez, I said tightly. I'll handle it, Jake and Sophia, sensing the tension in my voice, didn't need an invitation. They grabbed their jackets and followed me out the door. As we drove to the house, my mind raced with possibilities. What was Rebecca doing? How far was she willing to go? When we pulled up to the house, my worst fears were confirmed. A large moving truck was parked in the driveway, and two men were carrying out our entertainment center. Rebecca stood in the doorway, directing them like a conductor leading an orchestra. I slammed my car door shut and marched toward her. Jake and Sophia close behind. What the hell do you think you're doing? I demanded. Rebecca turned to me, her expression cold and calculated. Taking what's mine, she said simply. Since you've decided to cut me off financially, I'm liquidating our assets. These aren't just your things to take, I shot back. Half of this belongs to me. She laughed, a hollow sound that echoed across the yard. Oh please, Michael. You think I care about that anymore? You ruined my plans, so I'm taking what I can get. One of the movers looked uncomfortable, glancing between us. Look, man, we were just hired to move some stuff. We don't want any trouble. Jake stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. I suggest you put everything back and leave. This is a legal dispute now, and removing property during divorce proceedings is theft. He's right, Sophia added, already on her phone. I'm documenting everything that's being removed. The police are on their way. The movers exchanged nervous glances before setting down the entertainment center. Lady, you told us this was all cleared, one of them said to Rebecca, her face contorted with rage. Stop! I'm paying you to do a job. Not worth the legal trouble, the other mover muttered, heading back to the truck. Rebecca turned her fury on me. You think you've won. This is just the beginning, Michael. I'll take everything from you. Your house, your reputation, everything. You already tried that? I said calmly. You already tried that? I said calmly. The accounts are frozen. The lawyer knows everything. And now we have witnesses to attempted theft. It's done. As if on cue, a police cruiser pulled up behind us. 2 officers stepped out, approaching cautiously. What's going on here? One of them asked. Before Rebecca could speak, Sophia stepped forward. This woman is attempting to remove property during pending divorce proceedings. She's already drained joint accounts without consent, and now she's trying to sell off shared assets. The officer turned to Rebecca. Ma'am, is this true? They're lying, she hissed. This is my house too. I can do whatever I want with my things. Actually, Jake interjected, showing his former police ID. That's not how it works during a divorce. Neither party can dispose of marital assets until the court decides distribution. The officer nodded. He's right, ma'am. I'm going to have to ask you to stop removing items from the home until this is settled legally. Rebecca's face paled as she realized she was cornered. Her eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but finding none. Fine, she spat. Take your precious things. It won't matter when I'm done with you in court. I watched as the moving truck pulled away, empty except for a few small boxes Rebecca had packed before we arrived. The police took statements from everyone, including Mrs. Martinez, who had witnessed the whole thing from her window. As Rebecca stormed back into the house, slamming the door behind her, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This woman, who had once been the center of my world, was now a stranger consumed by bitterness and greed. What now? Sophia asked as we walked back to the car. Now we let the lawyers handle it, I said. I'm done playing her games. The following weeks were a blur of legal proceedings, paperwork, and emotional exhaustion. Rebecca fought tooth and nail for everything. The house, the cars, even items with purely sentimental value. But with each passing day, her position weakened. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Bank statements showed systematic withdrawal of funds. Text messages revealed her plans with Victor and others. Witness statements, including those from the movers and Mrs. Martinez, painted a clear picture of her character and intentions. 3 months after that fateful day, when I sat in a courtroom watching as the judge delivered his final ruling. Rebecca had been granted minimal alimony for a short period, but the house, most of our assets, and the majority of our savings remained with me. Her attempts to paint me as abusive or negligent had backfired spectacularly when Jake and others testified to my character. As we left the courthouse, Rebecca brushed past me, her eyes filled with hatred. I hope you're happy, she hissed. I'm not happy, Rebecca, I said quietly. I'm just free. She stormed off without another word, disappearing into a waiting car where Victor sat behind the wheel. I watched them drive away, feeling nothing but pity for both of them. Jake clapped me on the shoulder. It's over, man. Time to start fresh. Sophia smiled, linking her arm through mine. We're celebrating tonight, no arguments. That evening, surrounded by friends who had stood by me through the darkest period of my life, I finally felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. The betrayal still stung, the memories still hurt, but for the first time in months, I could see a future beyond the pain. 6 months later, I sold a house and moved to a smaller place across town. I couldn't bear to live in those rooms filled with memories of a life that no longer existed. I heard through mutual friends that Rebecca had moved to another state with Victor, only to be abandoned by him when he found someone new. Her social media, once filled with glamorous photos and boastful posts, went silent. Mrs. Martinez sent me occasional update. Rebecca had returned to town, working at a retail job and living in a small apartment. She looked older, worn down by her choices and their consequences. Sometimes I felt a twinge of sadness for what could have been, but never regret for how things ended. 1 year after that first phone call, I sat on the patio of my new home, watching the sunset with a cold beer in hand. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake, asking if I wanted to join him and some friends for dinner. Among them was a woman he'd been wanting to introduce me to, a kindergarten teacher with a kind smile and genuine laugh. I hesitated, only briefly before replying, I'll be there in 30. As I got ready to leave, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The man staring back at me looked different. Stronger, wiser, might be a little more cautious. but also more at peace. Had nearly broken me, but in rebuilding my life, I discovered parts of myself I never knew existed. Rebecca had taken much from me: trust, innocence, years of my life, but she had inadvertently given me something too: the knowledge that I could survive the worst and still find reasons to move forward. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, leaving the ghosts of my past behind. The future wasn't certain, but for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to discovering what it held. Subscribe and stay one step ahead of cheaters. And trust me, the next story makes this one look like a fairy tale.